Welcome to the Now You Know Akron podcast, brought to you by the journalists of beaconjournal.com. Each week, they will share their expertise on Akron and Summit County. Now, here's your host.
Okay, so I am here with my Beacon Journal colleague, Marla Ridenour. She covers pro sports for us and as a columnist, and I have a lot to talk to you about, Marla. So I want to start by talking about an honor that you are getting this weekend, which is you are going to be honored at the Ohio Associated Press Media Editors Award for a Hall of Fame induction. And then I also want to talk about a very personal and powerful column that you wrote recently as well. So let's start with your honor. I'm going to do a little bit of a short bio on you for readers. So you're a Louisville native and a 1978 graduate of Eastern Kentucky University. You were the first woman sports editor at the Eastern Progress College newspaper and received the Professional Achievement Award from the EKU Alumni Association in 2019. You became a professional sports writer in 1976 at the Lexington Herald-Leader, and you recently celebrated your 45th anniversary as a journalist. You've been called a trailblazer for women in journalism. You were hired by the Dayton Daily News and became the first female sports writer to cover the Browns in 1981 before the NFL mandated locker room access to female writers. You moved on to the Columbus Dispatch in 1990, continued to cover the Browns, and you joined the Beacon Journal in 1999. You've covered the Browns, Cavaliers, Indians, Guardians, pro golf, and you've been a columnist. You were also inducted into the Kentucky Hall of Fame in 2013. I know it's always weird to hear about like your own honors, Yeah. Tell me, do you feel like a trailblazer? And tell me how rare it was for you to be a female sports reporter and now columnist.
I guess I feel like a trailblazer now just because that's what people, that's what people say. But what's weird is back then in 1976, when I got my first job, we had 3 women on the sports staff. So I guess that sort of didn't make it seem as big as it is, just as it is. Now, starting to cover the Browns, there were women writers covering the NFL, around the country, but, there weren't a whole lot of them here. And a lot of, women in broadcasting. So, you were standing outside some locker room with Leslie Visser or with whatever, it wasn't like until they, started letting people in. I was lucky that the Bengals let women in the locker room during the playoffs before it was mandated by the league. So I got to cover some exciting playoff games in Cincinnati back in the 80s.
How many years after, so you started in 91, how soon after that did the NFL mandate the access? Do you remember?
I don't remember, but I think it was like 2 or 3 years. So,
okay.
But it was at the discretion of the teams until the league mandate came.
Gotcha. And going backward, what even got you interested in sports writing? Were you into sports growing up? What got you interested in journalism and then specifically sports journalism?
Well, I was not a jock. My dad was very disappointed in that. But he was a sports fanatic, took me to all kind of like minor league games and, stuff like we were big. His boss had season tickets to University of Louisville basketball. So, and when the boss didn't want to go, during the week, we always got his tickets and, we're always watching things on TV together, so my dad sort of, got me into that part of being like a fanatic. And we'd sit on the front porch or in the backyard and listen to Cincinnati Reds on the radio together and those kind of things. So, and then when I was in high school, I was on the yearbook staff and that kind of got me somewhat interested in journalism back then.
And so you even said when you got to college, you were one of 3 female sports writers. So was there not necessarily discrimination even when you got to, the college newspaper and said, hey, I want to write sports?
That was at my first professional job. In college, I was the first female sports editor, and I had to sort of convince them. That was like a 6-month tryout. Okay, I'd never written a sports story when they agreed to make me sports editor. And I had some tryout story about intramural racquetball that I guess was good enough, So anyway, but like I said, I was a sports editor for 2 years, and I had, other women, another woman always on the staff that did a lot of, was kind of my right-hand person back then. So, there were women that were exploring this back then.
Okay. And years, and probably early on in your career, were there discriminations against you as a female reporter in a male-dominated field, both, among fellow, mostly male reporters and probably males, in the sports world?
Well, it's interesting. When I started my career, I only covered women's sports for 4 years in Lexington. And the reason I actually left there was because someone at some meeting said women couldn't cover men's sports. So I knew I had to start looking for another job. I covered like small college basketball, but I was primarily hired I got my job because of Title IX. Kentucky hired its first female women's full-time coach, and they needed a woman to cover it. But I will say this, I didn't really feel like it was right for me to go in the locker room at women's games when men weren't allowed. So I did all my interviews out in the hall with them. I didn't agree. Plus, there were so many women in there with their hair dryers going. It was not conducive to great interviews anyway.
Okay. So then when you moved to Dayton is when you then started covering the Browns and started covering men's sports then, and it was the Browns?
Right. 6 months later, I was covering the Browns.
Wow. Okay. And then you hadn't been in a locker room for the, covering women. Then you went into the locker room for men because you had to, right? Because that's where the action was happening.
Right.
Okay. And did you and I were talking a little bit before we got on the interview that you kind of had to compartmentalize, like when you were, probably one of the only women in that locker room. Did you kind of have to just, make sure you just maintained your professionalism? And
one of my coworkers in Dayton used to say I could scan a locker room better than anyone they knew, because I sort of developed a way to find people by looking at them from the nose up. Like I would look at the top of their heads just to go out of the way so I wouldn't be caught, like looking where I wasn't supposed to be. But, it was, I once had a conversation with one of the Browns about, he thought I was just there to find a husband or, to tell my girlfriends, who was the best looking guy on the team, I was trying to convince him that this is really my job. And I did try to, just take the sexual part of it out of it. And just, this was my dream job. And I wasn't going to do anything to jeopardize, my professional status and access in that regard.
Did you ever have or someone try to push and say, well, you shouldn't be here in the locker room asking me questions?
That happened more with baseball. I remember we were at a Cincinnati Reds clubhouse, and I was in there with, he's a Hall of Fame writer, Hal McCoy, and Dave Parker was giving me grief saying, you don't belong in here. And Hal stuck up for me and told him, she's, the real deal. Also, I had an incident in spring training with an Indians coach. This was under the Hargrove days, who made some remark about me it was after a spring training game when I just needed like one comment from Jim Thome. And I just told I went to the PR guy and said, listen, I'll take this stuff from the players, but I'm not taking this from the coaches. So they nipped that in the bud right away. So like I said, there were a few remarks early in the Browns days, but it wasn't, you did get the impression, they're watching what you're wearing and, they got your eye on you, but it wasn't as overt, or really people weren't really saying anything like a few comments I had in baseball.
Mm-hmm. Over the years, have you mentored other female sports reporters?
I've tried to. It is sort of, I wouldn't say it's a super close knit group. Because we all have lives and a lot of them have kids and, but I think I find that more now than I did at the beginning, was just to, there's a lot of young women who are trying to start up right now. And it's so different that, there's a lot, it's not just writing anymore. And it's not, I've told people when I talk to college students that, You're not going to get weekends off. You're not going to have a 9-to-5 job. I almost try to scare them straight into what they're getting themselves into. But even worse now, it's like 24/7. So, I do try to open their eyes about what they're getting themselves into and how demanding it is.
Right. I mean, you surprised me yesterday when we were just talking about our schedules, and you said, "Well, I'll be at the Cavs game until 2 o'clock in the morning, and that's early." Yeah, that's so even within the same newspaper, you and I have different, work-life balance schedules. So a lot has changed in the 41 years since you've become a female sports writer, and of course, there's more female sports reporters. You were saying a lot, earlier on TV, and then now in newsprint. It sounds you just said this a little bit, but what advice do you have for young journalists, and specifically for women who want to go into sports journalism? Is it not probably as big of a deal as it was when, 40 years ago when, you were kind of blazing that trail?
Well, you do have to prove yourself, but I consider you have to prove yourself. I mean, that you're knowledgeable about the sport and all that. But I think you have to do that every year with a new team anyway. But I mean, you do have to be conscious of that because there's new players coming in. But you're going to have to do more of that when you're a female in this business. You have to be versatile. You have to, because there's demands on, videos and things you have to do. I mean, I always tell students, I mean, you don't have to be a journalism major. I would almost if you have a serious interest, I would almost major in that and minor in journalism, because there's, just if you wanted to specialize in a certain aspect. I also encourage people to read because, I mean, I still consider, obviously I'm a writer at heart. The writing part is important. And I don't feel like you can understand the rhythm of a sentence and just how to put things together if you don't read other good writers. So I really do feel like that's important. But I think what's been the key for me is you have to learn how to interview people and you have to talk to people. You have to have a conversation. You don't want to be putting them on the spot. You want to put them at ease. You want to get them to open up to you. You want to just pretend like you're chatting with a friend, so, I mean, those are some of the things I try to tell young journalists, both men and women about what it's like these days.
Sure. And let's just talk about getting a little bit of voice. Just the honor that you're getting this weekend. How does it feel you've already got one Hall of Fame induction, and you're getting a second. So, how do you feel about that?
Well, I'm telling you, Ohio is an incredibly talent-laden market for journalism. I mean, I worked with so many incredible people that just to have my name up there with them. I mean, one of my coworkers, Tom Archdeacon, was just inducted into this thing in 2019, and he's the gold standard when it comes to journalists. So, I mean, it's an incredible honor just to have my name included with. There's, like I said, there's winning an award in Ohio, I think is an incredible achievement just because of how many wonderful people are in the business.
Great. Don't know why this is happening. Let's move on to a very personal and powerful column you wrote recently. So you decided to share a secret that you said many of your closest friends didn't even know about after 47 years, that the Browns trading for a new starting quarterback, Deshaun Watson, and the allegations of 22 women against him of sexual assault, which he has denied, has triggered memories of your own sexual assault while you were in college. And you wrote a front page column that you were gang raped, your assailants were never caught or tried, and that your story was not believed initially by police and even the university president. You also said you were ashamed to tell your parents and that they didn't find out until they received the emergency room bill. You never discussed it, and you feel that your dad, who died 2 years later, had a broken heart from knowing what happened to you. So, just first of all, I've already told this to you personally a few times, I admire you so much for, taking such a personal and painful story and making it public, right? You don't have to do that. That's not something that you had to do. So can you talk a little bit about, why did you decide to write the column? How hard of a decision was it in a public forum? And, talk me through kind of, what got you from the initial thoughts of maybe I should do this to writing it.
Well, it didn't cross my mind until I wrote the column preceding this one about the Browns being the epitome of hypocrisy for exploring this deal. And then, there was a little bit of feedback about, he has not been convicted of anything, he's not, no, 2 grand juries have failed to indict him. Just, the kind of like, how could I feel so strongly about this when, he hasn't been charged, hasn't reached any settlements on any of these civil suits. So, that sort of got me to thinking just about back to what happened to me and how no one believed me. I had to take a lie detector test, in college, and they drove me to the state capitol and put me in this big chair. And, as horrifying as this whole thing was, that chair part is one of the most vivid memories. And then when I wrote about it for the college paper, because there were rumors that these things were going on, but no one knew. And it's not like today where you'd have a blast on every student's cell phone, to be alert, there's a possibility of this, that it wasn't happening back then. So that's why I decided to come forward then and write about it, an anonymous story in the paper. Our editor, I was just a news writer then, agreed to print it, but he ran it by the president. The president didn't believe it. He thought it was too outrageous to be believed. So that just got me thinking about, I guess what happens is when I have these memories, like strong feelings about personal things, I write about them. It's almost like it's like how I get through it. So, but also I've been thinking for years about what will I do when I retire? I really want to help sexual assault victims. I will, would I be a counselor? Would I even be qualified to be one? How can I help people? And I just decided that this was the time when I have a platform. We also have the platform with Connect through USA Today to reach the most people. And I have to confess, this was like a message from God saying, it's the time to do this.
Wow. And so was it like how many progressed from when you first started kind of getting the inkling, like, I should write about this, and then writing it?
It only took me a few days but when I started discussing whether I was going to write that, and I talked to like 4 or 5 people, I was so drained I couldn't put a word down that day, because just the talking this out and getting ready to write it was almost as exhausting as writing it. I wrote the whole thing, the initial rough draft, in like 90 minutes. It was like a stream of consciousness. Like you've got a 47-year-old secret that even your living family members didn't know about. So you're just like pouring your heart into this thing. It was almost like just as agonizing to decide to do it than it was to do it.
And I know that from talking to some of our, they talked to you and, wanted to make sure that you were completely comfortable with this, because it was, your choice, and they wanted to make sure that you, knew what you were getting into, because again, this was your story to tell. Were you worried about any type of backlash from the public?
Well, some people at the paper, we discussed the possible ramifications. Will this look like a conflict of interest? And the Browns might have been concerned about me, continuing to cover the team. Obviously there are still a lot of people that, don't like my coming out with this because, Watson hasn't been charged with anything. There's a lot of people that don't agree with me writing it, or, I guess didn't see my point on why I was writing it, was to try to help people who are, kind of suffering in silence like I was for so long. But yeah, we discussed that. And like I said, this is what I do, is when I take these leaps when I feel like it's right.
Right. And so you said, this is a 47-year-old secret that very few people knew about. I'm not sure how many people in your inner circle knew. Did you call anybody beforehand to kind of tell them before they'd read it in the paper?
Well, the first person I called was my best friend from college, she actually had to refresh my memory on some things, because I didn't even remember what year it was. But her mom was in the hospital about to die. And when she got the phone call, from the ER. She thought her mom had died. So, but and she's the one she told me about another person in our dorm who came up to her and wanted to know who wrote the story because same thing had happened to her. But on Friday, before Watson had his introductory press conference, I had to call my sister-in-law, and because I didn't want her and my niece and nephew reading about this and on the internet without knowing, and she had no idea. My dad, obviously, it's my half brother, but my dad had never told her husband about it. Because she would have known if he knew, and so no one in my family knew about this. So I just wanted to, and that was a very emotional phone call because she was blindsided. She had no clue. So that was probably the toughest phone call. But I couldn't really. I mean, I've had people call me since who a few of them knew, but I just couldn't call all those people and say, oh, by the way, I'm getting ready to drop this big column on you. I just couldn't do that. So I consulted a couple close friends in the business just to sort of feel them out on how they felt about this. And then, and like I said, my friend from college, and that was about it.
Okay. And how are you doing? This was a 14-year-old secret that I'm assuming you haven't dealt with much, right? You probably tried to push it down. And so this, of course, is, making you relive these things. How are you? I'm sure you're overwhelmed with responses and stuff too, but, are you going to seek some counseling or, how are you doing?
Well, I feel like it's been, sort of freeing in a way. I think the toughest thing was when the Channel 3 crew, Lydia Sparrow came over and we talked, and she wanted to go through the whole what happened that night thing, and that was rough. Even though I've been thinking it over in my mind, in the past couple weeks, it wasn't, reliving it on camera was pretty difficult. But I don't know. I feel like it's really been uplifting to hear from all these people that you haven't heard from, and, the responses from the people that I consider friends in the business and personally have been wonderful. So I guess that's sort of helping me. I really, the whole triggering part of it hasn't been that bad since I wrote it. I feel like, maybe I will need counseling someday, although I told one of my friends who suggested it, I said that might happen when I retire because I'm worried about what are these feelings going to be like when I don't have my work to plunge myself into. And I'm convinced that that's how I got through this whole thing, was just working devoting my entire life to my job.
Sure. Talk a little bit about public responses you've received. You were talking about how you've heard from your friends. What responses have readers, they've been emailing you, calling you, what kind of responses have you gotten?
Well, I probably have, I don't know, I didn't count them, but I've got at least 200 emails in my, work inbox. And it's been somewhat staggering how many have been affected by sexual assault, either a family member or personally, or, they're telling me what happened to them and how, it's amazing. I assume they're doing that because they want to make, me feel that, I'm not alone and all that. But it's amazing that even people that approach me, at a game or whatever, they've had something happen in their family or, granted, there's been a few harsh ones that, didn't agree with me writing this, but I've had responses from men and women who have been, sexual assault victims, or it's just been, I guess I would say eye-opening is this is, there's so many societal issues, and I sort of feel like this gets pushed to the side, and this has just kind of reawakened my, how pervasive this is. It's very sad, but also I'm glad that some of these people feel free enough to sort of tell me their stories.
Right. It's probably cathartic. And you touched on it a little bit. You know, what kind of negative reactions have you gotten, or what do you say to people who say, you know, there haven't been any charges filed, he hasn't been convicted of anything? You know, what do you say to that?
Well, obviously I haven't had time to answer all these people, but I would say in this forum, this was all about the triggering of what this triggered for me. This was not, you know, like this isn't about Watson and whether, you know, he eventually settles these suits, or, you know, whether this is, he didn't do any of this. This is just about, I mean, whether he likes it or not, this is going to be following him for a long time. And especially, you know, followers of the Browns are going to have to deal with this too. It's not just the people that have to cover it. So I was just trying to shine a light on what this kind of, you know, this story is going to bring for so many people who have devoted their lives to the Browns, whether as a fan or, you know, like me as a professional.
Right. Received any reaction to the Browns?
Well, Kevin Stefanski texted me on Saturday, and we really haven't been able to connect because he's so busy. But we set up some time to talk next week. A couple PR guys have texted me, just, you know, sending their support and, you know, how much they admire what I did. So that's been the extent of it thus far. But I'm sure we'll be, you know, there might be opportunities down the road.
And you did mention it earlier, but do you feel that you can continue to cover the Browns in your columnist role, having written this and knowing that Deshaun Watson triggers these memories for you?
I mean, I feel like I've always been able to separate the personal and the professional, and I haven't had there was nothing on Friday at his introductory press conference that made me think I wasn't going to be able to continue to do that. I mean, we'll see, but we'll see what the outcome of these civil cases is. I really don't think, obviously we're going to have to mention this constantly, at least for, you know, the next season and probably beyond. But I mean, I'm also here to write about how he performs on the field. So I don't see that affecting my judgment or my perspective at all.
Right. And I talked about this offline as well, but, you know, and I don't know what your future plans are, but did you consider retiring at all because of this?
Well, my first gut reaction was yes, only because, you know, you wonder, I mean, I think this is 38 years on the Browns beat, and it's somewhat, I consider this somewhat like, you know, like a step in the wrong direction for the franchise. And just, you know, I mean, as I once tried to explain to Bill Belichick, you want your team to succeed. You know, it's part of your, you know, when you're a kid, you want to like have a World Series ring on your finger. You know, writers used to get those when they covered, you know, like the Big Red Machine or what, you know, like you want to see your team. It's good to interview happy players, not, you know, players who are losing. So I mean, in my gut, that did cross my mind when this first happened, but then I decided, you know, I wanted to make that decision on my own terms. You know, this is still a wonderful job that is not a job at all. I mean, I'm getting paid to cover things that, you know, people, you know, would give their IT the witness, you know, so I mean, and I do enjoy it. So, you know, we'll see how much longer I can survive in this 24/7 world.
Right. And I know you were there on Friday, you know, for his first press conference, but have you interviewed Deshaun Watson yet? Or what do you think you'll say when you meet him?
I haven't yet. And I expect that the Browns are going to be kind of careful with, I wouldn't assume they will allow any one-on-ones right off the bat, you know, in his first season. You know, what's funny is the first time I met him was he was playing against Ohio State in the playoffs in 2016. And I was so impressed with him then. You know, I wanted the Browns to draft him #1 instead of Myles Garrett. So, that's probably been part of the conflict. I mean, I wrote about that in the hypocrisy column about I spent years upset that the Browns didn't pick him, but I don't think it's gonna, I'm not gonna bring up anything about these allegations when we eventually meet, if we do. And it's possible that won't happen, for quite some time, at least in a one-on-one setting. We're going to be obviously interviewing him on a weekly basis once he's cleared to play, and they're presuming there's no suspension by the NFL.
Right. What about the Haslams? Do you get much interaction with them, or what would you say to them if they reached out?
Well, I would like to talk to Dee Haslam one-on-one, because I guess in my very upset Tuesday night after they had the meeting with Watson, that it kept going through my mind about, would Dee Haslam really sign off on this? I would rather ask her about it than Jimmy, just because, I guess I consider, she's on all these committees for the league, and she's done so much, to sort of include, in the inclusiveness of women in the organization and making that, a priority, that I guess I was kind of disappointed, and I would like to talk that out with her at some point. Maybe that will happen in training camp. We'll see.
You said in your column that you feel like your life has come full circle, and that you've often thought about, as you mentioned earlier, thought about helping sexual assault victims in retirement. Do you feel like, with this column, you've spoken up for all victims? And what message do you want to send sexual assault victims to hear from this?
Well, judging from the reactions of the ones that I've emailed, I have spoken up for them. That's what they feel like I did. So I'm glad that at least the victims who have contacted me feel that way. I guess my message would be, this doesn't have to derail your life. Not everyone, has the strength that you can seek help to get through it. But I was able to get my dream job and keep my dream job despite, a horrifying experience that, it could have scarred me. I'm sure it did, but I was still able to go on. That's my number one thing. The also would be like, you don't doubt yourself if you're, when you're telling the truth and no one believes you. It's worth fighting to try. I did everything I could in the investigation to try to catch the people that, attacked me. And I believed it was worth it. So sort of fight for your truth, so to speak. And my last thing would probably be, it's probably not good to keep a 47-year-old secret. But even Channel 3 asked me the other day, why didn't you talk to your parents about this? And I was like, we weren't that kind of a huggy, talking family, talked about personal things. That was just not us. So if that's not the case, I guess it would be, I think it would probably have been, I was fortunate that I had close friends on my dorm floor who basically carried me through this, because they knew they were there and they knew everything that happened. But you really need, it's not like something you would discuss frequently, but you really do need to have someone to help you and try not to go through this alone.
Thank you again for a powerful column.
Well, I appreciate being able to talk about it. And like I said, hopefully if people see this or hear this, they will, like I said, just understand that I'm trying to help as much as I can and with whatever outlet I have right now.
Thanks again.
Thanks.